Radio IMWS.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Radio IMWS, broadcasting live from the Al Hikmah Centre in Batley, West Yorkshire. Now then, this is the election special on Radio IMWS, and you may well have heard us last week. We've got a new guest this week, but just before we start, let's run down the whole script that we've got. Now then, on May the 7th, voters up and down the country will head off to their local polling stations with an eye to vote in a local MP and a government. With just 11 weeks to go before the general election, it's important to make an informed decision and use your vote to shape politics on a local and national level with issues that matter to you. With this in mind, over the coming weeks, Radio IMWS will be giving an opportunity for local candidates to come into the studio and give you, our listeners, a chance to ask the questions that matter to you. Now today, co-hosting with me, we do have Mr. Ayubai. Bismillah, Ayubai. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
And now then, Ayubai, anything to add to that?
Yes, right, like we said last week, when we interviewed the parliamentary candidate for the Tory party, we want to make it very clear to our listeners that Radio IMWS election special is really here to find out about the views and the policies and vision and mission of the candidates. So before we start, we want to make it very clear to all our listeners that Radio IMWS will be very much neutral and do not intend to promote any particular candidate or a party.
Yeah.
However, we will try our very best to represent our listeners, IMWS members, and the wider community's interests. And to this end, we will challenge candidates on what they stand for and how they will benefit the community.
Right. Okay. Now then, joining us in the studio this week, we do have the Labour candidate for Dewsbury, Paula Sherriff. Paula, good evening to you.
Good evening.
And thank you very much for coming into the studio.
It's a pleasure.
Now, just before we start, a few things we need to get out of the way. Right, contact details. Listeners, you can interact. Remember, this is your opportunity to ask the questions that matter to you. There's a lot of things that are happening around you. You can see what's happening. What do you want to ask Paula? You can do so. You can ask right from now by WhatsApp or text message to 07460809218. Number again, 07460809218. We will be opening up the lines very shortly like we did last week. We're just going to let Paula tell us a little bit about herself before we do that. So in about 10 minutes, we'll be opening the lines up, hopefully, inshallah. And the show itself will be concluding at around about 9 o'clock. I know Paula's got a very tight schedule. I know we kept him just here until 10:15 last week. I don't think we can do the same with Paula. So so if you do want to ask questions, please do get them in as soon as possible. Now then, Paula, to start with, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I'm nearly 40 years old. I live in the constituency in Dewsbury. I was born in Glasgow to a Scottish mum who has Polish heritage and an English father. My dad was serving in the military in Scotland. And we moved to England when I was just a baby, just a few months old. And we moved around during my childhood due to my dad's job. He left the military after 22 years and joined the police. And then we moved to Yorkshire when I was 14. And I've obviously never moved away. I was educated to A-level standard, got a place at university, but decided to enter the world of work. And then I joined the police force as a support member of staff, and I specifically worked in the criminal justice area, basically supporting victims of crime. And I was one of the first people in the country ever to receive a commendation from a judge at a Crown Court, actually at Bradford Crown Court, in dealing with a prolific sex abuse case. Then when I was about 26, so I'd been in the police force around 9 years, I had a sort of a very life-changing event when my father, we discovered my dad had cancer. And it was obviously a very, very difficult time for the family. And thankfully, Dad had surgery incredibly quickly. And I was literally just blown away. We went to see him at the hospital, obviously. He was in intensive care. And it was an incredible moment for me. It was literally like an epiphany. Yeah. And I knew at that moment that I wanted to work in the NHS.
Right.
So I applied to work in the NHS, and thankfully I was successful upon the first job that I actually applied for.
Right.
And I'm still in that same job today. However, just about 2 years ago to this month, the service that I work in was subject to a formal tender exercise, and the contract was awarded to a private healthcare company. So my employment two-peared. That was something I didn't have any choice over. Yeah. It was either effectively go to the private healthcare company or resign.
Okay.
And I'm still doing that job part-time now.
Okay, and why stand for the Dewsbury seat?
Okay, when I decided I wanted to stand for Parliament, I considered very carefully which seat would be right for me. And I decided that I was only ever going to apply for one seat. There's a short story behind this. I developed a website during the selection process, during the internal party selection process. And I wrote a narrative, and somebody put that on my website for me. And I'd written, I will only be seeking selection in Dewsbury. And this chap rang me up and he said, are you sure you want that on there? Because if you don't win Dewsbury, if you don't win the party selection, it's going to be difficult if you decide to go for another seat. And I said, no, that's absolutely fine. Leave it on there. I'm only going for Dewsbury. I wanted somewhere local. I was living in the Wakefield area, so I didn't just want to be what some people would consider to be a parachuted candidate. I wanted somewhere local, somewhere where I was familiar with the people and the area. Obviously, I visited Dewsbury sort of many times, during the 26 years I've lived in Yorkshire. Yeah. But also looking at some of the issues, I took some time to explore some of the pertinent issues that were going on in Dewsbury. Just looking, for example, Dewsbury Hospital. I'd been heavily involved in a campaign regarding Pontefract Hospital and had achieved a lot of success. Yeah. And when I heard what was going on at Dewsbury, it was clear that was the place for me. Right. So here I am today.
Okay. Well, that brings us nicely on to question number 3, which
if I could just
sure.
Just going back a little bit about how you got into politics. I mean, what sort of experience have you got of being a politician? I know you were a councillor somewhere earlier on in your career.
Yes.
But in terms of hardcore politics and your experience in that.
Yeah, I think, interestingly enough, when you work in the public sector, as I have done for over 20 years, politics affects everything you do. And some people might not always sort of realise that. I think sometimes it's quite incidental. So I was always political, if you like. I was always interested in politics, and I was an activist within the Labour Party for many, many years. So I had some great mentors within the party who I followed very closely over the years. And then in 2011, I decided that I wanted to put my skills to good use, and I decided to stand to be a councillor. And obviously, I was elected in 2012, and it was it's been a fantastic experience. Obviously, I'm still a councillor to this day, although I will give that up should I be elected as the MP for Dewsbury.
Do you think you've got the right qualifications and the credentials to be a parliamentarian? Absolutely.
I think nowadays what people want when we're out there on the streets talking to voters and obviously listening to voters, which is the crucial thing, people tell us that they're sick of career politicians. They don't want a parliament that is just full of people who've gone to university, got a job in Westminster straight away, and then almost immediately transferred that into a parliamentarian job. They want people like me who've worked on the front line, not necessarily just in hospitals and the police force. They want people who've been care workers, shop workers. There should be no barriers to becoming an MP, and I'm really proud to have that, bring that real life experience.
So what's your idea about the role of an MP?
Again, the role of an MP, it's quite a broad thing to define, but the main thing is standing up for your constituents at every possible opportunity. So I strongly believe that MPs shouldn't do any other jobs except be an MP. So if I'm an MP, let me be absolutely clear, and this is one of the pledges I'll be making to the people of Dewsbury, Murfields, Kirkburton and Demmydale, that I will be an MP solely. I will take no other paid work during the whole time I'm an MP whatsoever. So it's about being hard-working, but it's also, being a great advocate when you're down in Westminster, obviously, standing up at every opportunity, trying to bring investment into the area, being really, really proud of the area that you represent, which obviously I am. But also when you're at home, being a great constituency MP, being there for the people that you represent, ensuring that you're accountable. and ensuring that they have access right across the constituency. You know, I want to be the sort of MP who can walk down the street in Ravensthorpe, in Saviltown, in Murfield, in Denbydale, in Sisset, and speak to people on every week that I'm back from London.
Right. Okay, now then, we are going to open up the lines as well. We've just gone into 10 minutes, almost exactly. You can give us a call on 01924 505 629 if you want to come live on Radio IMWS and ask a question. Alternatively, if you want to send us a text or WhatsApp, you can send it to 07460809218. Now then, Paula, I know some of your, some of the, issues that you find are very, very important. One is Dewsbury Hospital.
Absolutely.
Now, we're seeing cuts in Dewsbury Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
The first question would be, you're putting Dewsbury Hospital down as something that you'd want to save. How can you save it when we've already more or less halfway down to the proposals being implemented? I mean, the child assessment unit is already up and running. We're only waiting for maternity, which isn't going to be long, and we're only waiting for the A&E to be downgraded. How are you going to save that?
It's an absolute travesty what's happening at Dewsbury Hospital. I'm absolutely clear on my stance regarding both Dewsbury Hospital and healthcare. You're right. Unfortunately, the children, the paediatric ward has already gone, but it's about protecting the services that are there. And then from then on, hopefully, if I'm elected as the MP for this area in May, it's just constantly fighting for the future of the services and trying to bring services back to Dewsbury. You know, the people of this area deserve a hospital. We have a fantastic building there, and the services should not be taken away.
Now, a lot of people during the consultation period raised the reasons why Mid Yorkshire were going through these proposals and cuts. One of the reasons given was the whole PFI mess. Now, that was something that was introduced by your Labour Party during a Labour government. Now, is the PFI responsible for the mess Mid Yorkshire hospitals are finding themselves in?
The concept of PFI was actually born out of a Conservative government. It was continued by the Labour government. I do acknowledge that. But no, I don't think the PFI is responsible for the position we find ourselves in. The PFI contracts came about because we had a number of hospitals up and down the country that were clearly not fit for purpose. I previously worked at Pinterfields Hospital, and there was rising damp in virtually every area, and there were areas that were dilapidated and literally falling down. However, we have to learn lessons from the previous PFI episodes, and we have to constantly strive to provide value for money going forward. But part of the problem regarding the fate of Dewsbury Hospital, and there are a number of issues here, is that the government have imposed huge cuts to our health budget. So they've spent over £3 million and counting on a top-down NHS reorganisation, which David Cameron promised would not happen. Yeah. And like I say, it's difficult for the management of the trust have some very difficult decisions to make.
On the PFI issue, Balfour Beatty, for example, in October sold their 50% share in Mid Yorkshire Trust. They made a profit of £42.2 million. Meanwhile, the trust themselves are having to pay enormous sums to basically the people who own them. And then you've got the argument where people have put forward that there are ridiculous costs that have been incurred by the trust. For example, the changing of a light bulb, and they've been charged £10 and £20 by Balfour Beatty. There's some scandalous things that have happened there. Now, a lot of people have said that's because of the PFI. Is that true? Is it because of the PFI?
I don't think it's solely because of the PFI, no. I think there have been a number of decisions taken, down the line, where we can learn lessons. Of course we can, but ultimately we have state-of-the-art hospitals, and it's absolutely crucial that we provide services that are fit for those hospitals. So, the fact that the proposing to downgrade A&E at Dewsbury Hospital, when we already see that Pinterfields Hospital cannot cope with the current flow of patients. On 70 occasions in the last year, Pinterfields Hospital has had to physically shut their doors and divert patients to Dewsbury. Now, if Dewsbury, obviously, as your listeners will well know, and as you will well know, if Dewsbury Hospital had a downgraded A&E department, where would those patients go? People want to go generally when they're unwell to the hospital nearest their home. It causes great anxiety to their relatives who may be following an ambulance, who may not even have their own transport, who may have to rely on public transport or on on taxis, which obviously can be very expensive. So I'm absolutely clear I'll be fighting for every single service at Dewsbury Hospital.
Okay, we have got a listener message come in.
If I could just...
Go.
On this same subject. Paula, you quite sort of interestingly said that you aim to be a constituency MP.
Yes, that's correct.
To be there for the people of Dewsbury and the surrounding areas.
Yes, that's correct.
And with regards to Dewsbury Hospital, what, as an activist, what have you done so far?
Yeah, can I just read this message because it's very much on the same lines as well. This listener was messaged in asking, what has Paula done to stop the downgrading of important services at Dewsbury Hospital? Was the Save Dewsbury Hospital campaign by local Labour group a political stunt, hoping to score points against the Tories, slash other parties? Wouldn't a cross-party support group be more effective in lobbying the Mid Yorkshire Trust against the downgrade? So there's two kind of questions there. Firstly, what have you done? And secondly, Save Dewsbury Hospital Labour initiative. Wouldn't it have been better if it was a cross-party initiative?
Interesting you say that there is a meeting group that meet once a month, and they're a branch now called Keep Our NHS Public, and they're the Dewsbury element of that. And I've attended in the last 14 months from being selected as the parliamentary candidate. I think I've missed one of those meetings, and they meet every single month, sometimes more than once. And I think I missed that particular meeting because I was actually unwell. And interestingly enough, we've invited all of the other political representatives, and at those specific meetings, I don't think I've ever seen. I certainly haven't seen our MP, and I know he's been invited on a number of occasions, nor have I seen any of the other major political parties represented there. So, I'd be more than welcome to meet with them and discuss if there is a basis that we can move forward. I'll take the other questions in a moment, but unfortunately, regarding our current MP, Mr. Reevell, his stance on the hospital has been quite different. He has publicly supported or endorsed the downgrade of the hospital, which I know a lot of people find just absolutely impossible to believe, and I certainly find it incredibly difficult. I mean, when we're out on the doorsteps, people are aware that Mr. Reevell, has agreed about the downgrade of the hospital, and he says he's spoken to healthcare professionals and managers and things. But when I work in the health environment, and I still work in a hospital premises, and I have honestly never spoken to a single individual who thinks that the downgrade of Dewsbury Hospital will benefit patient care in any way. Quite the opposite. I've spoken to people who have told me unequivocally that this will damage patient care and potentially, lives may be lost as a result of these changes.
I mean, I'm conscious of the time, and I know I've only got you for an hour, so I'm going to push you on this one, because the question the listener asked, and Ayuba asked as well, what have you done to stop the downgrading of important services?
Okay, so I've been involved at every step of the way. I've obviously attended these meetings. We've discussed our next ports of call, if you like. I've attended a number of trust meetings where I've been open and vocal about my opposition. Yeah. I have met with Stephen Eames on a number of occasions, and I've also met with the representatives from the CCG. Yeah. And on every occasion, I've been open and transparent and honest with them about, the fact that I absolutely oppose the downgrade. I also took part last year in the walk from Dewsbury to Wakefield to it was a national walk called March for the 999 March for the NHS, and that was really to bring attention to the national picture in terms of the NHS, in terms of downgrading, and I'll continue to do that. I've stood on street corners and I've collected signatures for petitions as well. Yeah,
I mean, just to ask a final question on the downgrading of the hospital itself. I think what the listener is asking for, and I think a lot of people are worried about as well, is that when in government in 2004, it was a Labour MP in Dewsbury, when the merger between Dewsbury Hospital and Pinderfields took place. Mm-hmm. It was under a Labour government, it was under a Labour MP. Now, the question that I think people are wanting to know is, it's very easy to protest against closure when it's come in during a Conservative or an opposition-led government. Are you going to be just as strong against closure of services, not just Dewsbury Hospital, but other cuts and other services locally, if a Labour government is there?
Stronger.
Yes. Well, you heard it first here.
I will be fighting for the future.
Right,
of the services. Obviously, if the people put their trust in me and elect me in May, it's my responsibility to fight for them, and I will fight at every every avenue possible.
Yeah. Okay, we were going to go into a break, but I think, and I'm a bit conscious of time, there's a few things I want to go.
Yeah.
Okay, now, moving on, but staying on healthcare just for a little while longer. The CCG have taken over from the Primary Care Trust.
Yes, that's correct.
What's your opinion regarding the CCG?
Well, once again, the CCG are in an incredibly difficult position at the moment because they've had to endure huge budget cuts from central government. And they've got some very, very difficult decisions to take.
Yep, but as you've mentioned, taking services out of hospitals basically leaves the hospitals open to closure. The CCG are taking a lot of services which are being conducted presently in hospitals into the doctor's surgeries, like, for example, the ECG machines, etc., etc. Now, you can understand it where there's no hospital nearby, but should there be a doctor's surgery less than a quarter miles away with an ECG unit there?
We have to be clear where the patient should receive the care that is most appropriate to them at the place that is most appropriate to them. So on some occasions, no, I don't agree that hospital services should be removed from the hospital, and I have, there are certain incidences where I have raised concerns. But on occasions, yes, it can be appropriate to have an ECG at a doctor's surgery. For example, if someone attends with mild chest pain, the doctor may wish to take the opportunity to do that ECG there and then, and it can be cheaper for that to be carried out.
These are routine appointments that have been taken away from the hospital and sent into the GP surgeries.
It's sometimes more appropriate and obviously we're looking at this care closer to home agenda. Putting someone in hospital, it can be very, very expensive. So we should, at every opportunity, try to keep people out of the inpatient admission into hospital. But I think we just need to be careful that we're not trying to. It's about the appropriateness of the care.
Right. Okay. Now then, we have got some questions come in. I will go onto the listeners' questions. But if you do want to take part, you can do so. You can call the studio on 01924 505 629, or you can send us a text or WhatsApp on 07460809218. Now then, okay, a listener sent in a question for Paula Sherriff. Do you think crimes of hate, particularly against Muslims, are on the rise? If you are elected, what do you propose to do to tackle this?
Okay, hate crimes against Muslims, I wouldn't necessarily suggest they're on the rise, but I think, again, the media have a big part to play in this. So I think it's any hate crime should be treated with the utmost seriousness. And I know the West Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner has invested a significant amount of money in ensuring that all hate crime is addressed, and that we ensure that the police officers on the streets are aware and have sufficient training to try and address some of these issues. If I was elected as the MP for Dewsbury, in terms of hate crime, we must adopt a zero tolerance attitude, regardless of whether it's to Muslims or to any other.
Have you been approached by anybody who's told you that they've been the victim of a hate crime, or have you got any local statistics? Any Mark Burns-Williamson, has he provided any statistics locally within the Dewsbury area?
I don't have them with me today. I certainly can arrange to obtain those. But yes, I have spoken to some individuals who have been, yes, right, the victim of hate crime.
You've seen the statistics as well?
Yes, I have seen them previously.
So how have the statistics, in your opinion? I mean, you mentioned at the start that have been slightly exaggerated by the media.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily exaggerated. I wouldn't say that.
But on the rise, sorry, it's not necessarily on the rise. What about the statistics that you got? Are they showing that they are on the rise? Or?
The statistics weren't measurable in terms of like year on year.
If you look at nationally, for instance, I mean, Islamophobia is on the rise, definitely.
Yes.
There are more and more severe incidents on a daily basis now. That can quite sort of translate to things happening in Dewsbury quite easily.
Yes, of course.
Now, as a Labour Party MP or prospective MP, what are the plans to sort of eradicate these sort of heinous crimes?
Well, it's about ensuring that we work with our partnership agencies as well, so that the police are working with the schools, with third sector, with charities, to ensure that we're trying to stamp this out right from the bottom. There's got to be an element of including this in the sort of educational agenda, in the national curriculum. But it's also working with groups in the area and trying to sort of, educate them and communicate with them and just encouraging that community cohesion, particularly in areas like Dewsbury, which has a wide ethnic diversity. But in terms of the police, obviously have a huge part to play, and I know they're investing in specialist officers to deal with the hate crime, and we need to absolutely ensure that those budgets are protected.
How do you see the community cohesion in Dewsbury?
I think that there's some fantastic examples of community cohesion. I was speaking to somebody recently on Dewsbury Moor who's actually running a youth club for children. It's fantastic. It's attended by a wide variety. There's white, there's Asian youth, there's some Afro-Caribbean youth, and I think that's a wonderful example. But there's obviously work still needs to be done, and we need to ensure, that we can continue to fund these sort of projects.
Right, okay. Do you see a divide, between a massive divide, or rather a significant divide between the different communities? Because you have got, like you say, your Dewsbury seat, you've got the area of Saviltown, for example, which is heavily Muslim populated, and Dewsbury Moor. Then you've got the areas such as Denby Dale and Kirkburton, which have Muslims and South Asian people and even ethnic minorities are scarce.
Yes.
So you've got a constituency that is very, very diverse. What do you see there? Is there a massive divide between the people of this side of Saviltown and the people of that side of Denby Dale?
No, absolutely not. No, I don't see the divide in that sense. I think obviously, that there have been things that have concerned me that I've seen when, things on things like social media and some of the reporting and the way things are reported. But again, I think it's not something that can be solved overnight, unfortunately. And again, the media are responsible sometimes for creating sort of divisions, if you like, and putting perhaps one ethnicity against another. So we need to ensure that there's more responsible reporting.
Okay, we've got another question that's come in. Do keep your questions coming in. Remember, we've only got Paula for probably another half an hour or so. So text or WhatsApp 07460809218. Now, then the question that's been sent in is: the vast majority of the victims of anti-Muslim prejudice are women. What are you going? Oh, sorry, there's another one coming. What are you going to do to address this in your constituency, nationally, and how are you going to encourage Muslims to report hate crimes against them? So, just read that again. Sorry, because I skipped a little. The vast majority of the victims of anti-Muslim prejudice are women. What are you going to do to address this in your constituency and nationally, and how are you going to encourage Muslims to report hate crimes against them?
Okay, I think we've covered some of this in the previous question, but in terms of the women, obviously at the moment I'm trying to engage with every section of the constituency, but it's around sort of giving these women avenues where they feel safe, where they feel secure, and also ensuring we continue to provide the funding for some of the services that are really under threat as a result of the government cuts. Many of the women refuges, rape crisis centres up and down this country are being cut as a result of huge, disproportionate cuts to funding. Right. So it's absolutely crucial that we continue to support these agencies and these charities and these organisations that provide this absolutely crucial support. But in terms of Dewsbury, I'll continue to go and meet the sort of women's groups, particularly in terms of, and also sort of, I've popped along to the women's centre in Dewsbury, met a lady there called Kate, and she's done some very specific work on this issue. So it's about sort of working with partners as well, and looking at ways that we can try and remove the stigma around reporting hate crime.
Right. Okay.
Because you're quite keen, aren't you, to tackle violence against women.
Absolutely, yeah.
And girls.
Well, violence per se.
Sorry,
but in terms of Muslim women,
Yeah.
I think that the crimes against Muslim women are sort of particularly so directed at the way they dress, for example, the veil, the hijab, and those kind of things actually sort of come into some contention, and those are the kind of things that Muslim women suffer from.
Yeah, we're just picking up. Just picking up on the text message about what are you going to do nationally, and about encouraging Muslims to report hate crimes. And I wanted to add to what Ayub has mentioned there, because we have seen parties and individual MPs bring bills to the House or speak out about the veil, for example.
Yes.
What's your opinion on the Muslim veil, first of all?
My opinion on the Muslim veil is actually one thing that really pleases me about walking sort of down the street in Dewsbury. It is the diversity that you can walk down. You can see a lady wearing a full veil, or perhaps somebody wearing a mini skirt. And I don't think anybody, is in a position to tell another person what to wear. Yeah. I'm incredibly proud. I think, it's about our tolerance, and it's something that makes Britain great. Yeah. It's around our tolerance. So I think live and let live.
Right. So in Parliament, how are you going to express this view? Because this is the problem we've got. Because in Parliament, there are people who are raising these objections and talking, mostly men, telling women not to wear veils. Now, how are you going to deal with them?
Well, it's about dealing with the wider issues about why they feel that way. It's about looking at what is their problem about women wearing veils. Usually, it's a problem that the person has themselves, rather than, I think there are occasions when it's probably appropriate for people for women to lift the veil. For example, perhaps primary school teachers, perhaps practicing doctors in hospitals. I think there are occasions when that sort of communication can be inhibited by the veil. But in general, I absolutely I would be completely opposed to any sort of banning of the burqa or such legislation, and I would be quite vocal about that, and I would invite these people to come along and visit Dewsbury. Perhaps it's about ignorance. Perhaps they've never lived in an area which enjoys a wonderful ethnic diversity. Yeah. It might be that they themselves have their own prejudices, and that they've read about people in the paper and again, how the papers distort these sort of stories. Yeah. And they may just feel ignorant. So I tell you what, come along to Dewsbury, walk down the street with me, and see if you feel threatened by these women, because it's very unlikely that they will. So that will be my.
It's usually the women who feel threatened when they're walking in the street of Dewsbury, aren't they? And it's the work of the police is important.
Absolutely,
reporting the crimes. And
we have 1,000 less police officers.
I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but that was the important point that the listener actually asked about what are you going to do to encourage people. I mean, the problem we've got here is there are hate crimes that are taking place.
Yes, of course.
They're not getting reported, so nothing can be done about it. What are you, as an MP, if you come in as an MP of Dewsbury, what are you going to do to encourage people to report hate crimes, men and women?
Well, we have to open up the dialogue. I think we absolutely have to get out there. Get the communication going. Have big meetings. Let's get out there. But then let's speak with the head teachers in the schools, the community leaders. About why this sort of behaviour is carrying on. Again, that there is no overnight solution. But another thing that we need to address is, since 2010, West Yorkshire Police has nearly 1,000 less police officers since 2010 than it does have today. And that's absolutely unacceptable. So when we're talking about reporting hate crime and things like that, we need the resources. And there's further cuts planned. Possibly many hundreds more police officers, will be taken off the front line. And the police are stretched. I mean, I spent, late last year, an evening with the police in Dewsbury on the beat. Yeah. We went out and we discussed lots and lots of issues, from antisocial behaviour to hate crime to domestic violence, all sorts of things. And they're telling me that they're expected to do a lot more with a lot less officers. And obviously, it's really important that people feel safe in their own homes, that they feel safe walking down the street in Dewsbury or Murfield or Denby Dale. And that's going to be difficult with so many fewer police officers.
So Labour coming in would increase the number of police officers on the beat?
Absolutely. We would scrap the Police and Crime Commissioner post and take that back into frontline policing.
So Well, that's a member of your party might be a bit afraid for a job.
Potentially, but it's about the betterment of the country, and I'm sure he would agree.
Okay,
change of subject then?
Sure, yes, we will. Which we are going to take a break because we've had Paul on for the past half an hour, and I think I need a bit of a break. Yeah, I need to get a bit of a break as well. Okay, you are listening to Radio IMWS, broadcasting live from the Al Hikmah Centre up in Batley, West Yorkshire. This is the election special programme. I'm Brother Muhammad in the studio. We do have Ayubai with me, who's co-hosting, and our special guest today is the Labour candidate for Dewsbury, Paula Sherriff. If you want to ask Paula a question, and I know we've got some already, but do get your questions in as soon as. Remember, the show will be concluding around 9 p.m. So get your questions in as soon as possible. We're going to take a very short break, inshallah, and we will be back right after this. Online and on your home receiver, you're listening to Radio IMWS. Join the women-only over 50s Elderly Lunch Club every Monday from 12 p.m. till 3 p.m. at the Al Hikmah Centre. Enjoy a meal in the company of friends as well as gentle exercise routines, including the use of treadmills and exercise bikes. That's the Over 50s Elderly Lunch Club every Monday from 12 p.m. till 3 p.m. at the Al Hikmah Centre on 28 Track Road, Batley, WF177AA. For more information, call 01924 500 555. Reach your customers through our radio, magazines and website with competitive rates advertising on Radio IMWS, Pegam, An-Nisa and the IMWS website could give your business the boost it deserves. For more details, email info@imws.org.uk or call 01924 500 555. It is related by Sayyidina Anas radiallahu anhu that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, when a man marries, he has completed half of his religion, so let him fear Allah regarding the remaining half. The Al Hikmah Nikah service launched by the IMWS aims to introduce prospective marriage partners to help fulfill this important aspect of faith. The service is open to unmarried Muslims who are permanent residents of the UK. For more information, visit our website at www.imws.org.uk. Radio IMWS. And welcome back to Radio IMWS. This is the election special on Radio IMWS. It is Friday the 13th of February, and in the studio we do have Paula Sherriff. We've got a few other people in the other room as well, but that's fine. We don't mind that. If you want to, now then, this is the election special. We mentioned at the start that it's you won't just be voting for the for an MP come May. You will be voting for a government as well. So it's important to ask the questions now, and hopefully, inshallah, be able to make an informed decision. You can call us on 01924 505 629, or you can text or WhatsApp us on 07460809218. Now, I know there are a lot of WhatsApps coming in, so you're better off WhatsApping, and hopefully, inshallah, we can get you through that way rather than the phone. So please do WhatsApp your questions on 07460809218, because in the next 23 minutes or so, we want to get as many questions in as possible. Now, Paula, one of the questions that came in, there's a few actually. There's rising unemployment in this area. How will you address this as an MP?
Okay, rising unemployment is a huge concern, and particularly around long-term youth employment. And the Labour Party have got a plan to deal with this. In terms of youth unemployment, we would actually introduce a compulsory job guarantee for young people. So anybody between 16 and 25 that have been out of work and claiming benefits for 1 year, we would guarantee them a job, which is absolutely... How? We will guarantee them a job by taxing bankers' bonuses. So that is how we would raise the money.
Yeah, how would you create the job itself?
We would work with businesses and with various companies, organisations, and we would pay the wages for 6 months for that individual, as well as the national insurance contributions. So we would obviously, there would be a fantastic effect. We would grow those businesses. We would give a young person the opportunity of getting into work. And those people who needed skills like English, maths, IT, we would actually provide those skills as well.
Okay.
So, this sounds a little bit like the old job creation schemes under Labour we had.
Yeah.
I mean, what will happen after 6 months?
We would obviously give the individual during that time the work experience, and we would hope that the companies would keep those individuals in work during that period. But obviously we would also open that scheme up to people over 25 who had been out of work for 2 years. But in the meantime, we would be creating 200,000 new homes every year, obviously not all within the Dewsbury constituency. But obviously this would create jobs. We would be growing the economy in a sensible way, which again would see the jobs market increase. So we're quite confident that there will be a sustainability with that plan.
Right. Okay. We've got a question come in. It's slightly moving away from that. But what are Paula's views on the CTS, the Counter-Terrorism Security Bill, which is now legislation?
Yes.
Ordinary Muslims are concerned they will be targeted for practicing their faith. What's your view?
Yeah, I actually share some of the concerns around this counter-terrorism bill. It's absolutely crucial that we do legislate, obviously, against terrorism. And I think the events that we've seen recently, for example, the Charlie Hebdo incident in Paris, shows us that we have to protect our citizens. But it has to be considered and it has to be cautious, and we mustn't have a knee-jerk reaction. Previously, when the Labour Party introduced counter-terrorism legislation, we brought in independent specialists, experts who could advise accordingly. And again, it's crucial that we move away from a knee-jerk reaction, so that we're not actually persecuting people, and we're not actually removing the civil liberties of people. So yes, I do share some of the concerns around this act.
It's just, Paula, I share some of your views there. Obviously, this bill has been rushed through Parliament at an enormous speed without any real scrutiny.
Yes.
And the worrying fact is that the Labour Party has actually supported most of it. Yeah, they've not really sort of said anything that what you're saying. We
haven't had.
What will a Labour MP? What difference is a Labour MP going to make?
The bill has received all party support. I think it's crucial to say that from obviously all of the main parties. And I think again, I reiterate, it's absolutely crucial that we guard against terrorism, but we must ensure that we provide adequate resources to the security services to do this. However, as an individual, it will be my responsibility. One thing I'm really, really keen to impress upon yourselves and your listeners this evening is I would be accountable to yourselves, and the decisions I make will be very much, hopefully, representative of your views. Yeah. So should this legislation have come to pass when I was your MP, I would have taken time to consult with the community, with as many elements of the community as possible. So not just the Muslims, but obviously the white community, and seek people's views. So I could take those back to Parliament and perhaps even ask for some slowdown in the speed at which this bill was passed.
I appreciate that, but like we mentioned, we will not just be voting for an MP, but a government as well.
Of course.
And what we've seen is the opposition have not really questioned this bill. It's gone through at a rapid speed. We're not saying that there shouldn't be legislation to prevent terrorism. Of course there should be. But it has to be, like you said, calculated. It has to be scrutinized. It has to be done over time. We mentioned Charlie Hebdo, but this legislation was actually brought in before Charlie Hebdo. Mm-hmm. It began its life in November.
Yes.
So we're asking the question, why has the opposition, your party, and the leader of the opposition, not put his foot down to say, hold on a second, we need to look at this more closely to make sure we're not breaking civil liberties, particularly when human rights groups have objected to a lot of points in this legislation.
I understand that some observations were made about this bill from the Labour Party. Whether people consider that was enough, obviously, I hope I've made my position clear in terms of that. I do share some concerns around this bill. However, we have to remember that the Labour Party are not in government. We have a coalition government.
Yes, but the opposition is there to challenge the government.
Yes,
that's the whole
true,
idea
yes.
of the opposition.
Yes, that's correct.
So why hasn't the opposition challenged the government on this legislation? Let me take another one. The prevent strategy. Unfortunately, that is a legacy of the former the former Labour government. Labour government brought that one in. It stigmatised Muslims. It's to this day. In fact, actually, in this new legislation, it's included. Now, the question I want to ask is, like I said, people will be choosing an MP and a party, a government.
Yes.
Now, if they're going to choose a Labour government, what assurance are they going to have that the Labour government is not going to start bringing in more terror laws? First of all, would you, as an MP, would you try to stand up against and take this legislation back into Parliament to be discussed? Would you raise objections against this legislation?
I would ask for further debate.
You would ask for further debate?
Yes, further debate, yes.
Right, okay. And what about the worries that general Muslim population across Britain have, and of course locally, which is that Muslims are being singled out by politicians and policies, because this policy does do that. Prevent is largely targeting Muslim communities.
And that's why it's absolutely crucial that we have MPs that are prepared to consult with the community, that don't just go ahead and sort of, like I say, back to the knee-jerk reaction. So I promise the people of Dewsbury, Kirkburton, Murfield and Denbydale that I will do that. I will be an MP who listens and who is, like I say, I'll be a full-time MP. So I will be one that is accountable and transparent.
Okay, Eva?
Right, okay. You'll be very much aware that Muslims living around this area and Muslims living all over the world feel there's injustice in Palestine and in particular Gaza.
Yes.
I know you've been involved in certain campaigns.
Yes.
What do you think is the solution to freeing Palestine from the occupation?
Okay, as you've alluded, I have been involved in a number of campaigns, and I've was very proud to speak a few times at campaign rallies in the local area. I think we have to be absolutely clear that what's happened in Palestine, there's been genocide. It's been some of the things I've witnessed, some of the pictures and the images that I've watched on TV and seen on sort of social networking sites will stay with me for the rest of my life, such as the horror and the terror. And we must acknowledge that some of the things that the Israeli government have done have been absolutely unacceptable and indeed inappropriate. I always think about the number of children that were killed during the last dispute. Obviously, we've now achieved a ceasefire, temporary ceasefire. We have to look forward to a two-state solution. Israel has a right to exist, but equally, so does Palestine. And we need to look at some sustainable...
So what do we do to bring that about? Because at the moment, nothing seems to be working.
Well, it's around working with the UN, the United Nations, and trying to sort of work together to achieve a solution.
Do you think imposing a boycott, a boycott on Israel, on Israeli goods, for instance, is a way forward?
That's obviously an option that's available, but I think we need to look for a longer term solution. What's always struck me about the ongoing sort of conflict is that the ceasefire will only hold good for a short period, unfortunately, and the war seems to...
Well, what we've seen is after the summer, the attacks on Gaza during the summer. Now, every life is of course precious, no matter what faith
Absolutely.
or which side of the border it is. However, the promises that were made to the people of Gaza have not been fulfilled. The opening of the borders have not been fulfilled.
Yes.
The peace treaties are not working. The ceasefires don't work. Like you said, every few years we see the same thing happening again. We are not anywhere closer to a two-state solution. I want to push you on the issue of boycott, divestment and sanctions, because that is an international campaign which was launched by people, or rather within Palestine. Would you support the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign, and would you stand in Parliament and ask Parliament to support the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign?
I would have to look at the finer detail of what was involved in terms of that boycott.
What about sanctions themselves? Would you ask the government, if the Labour Party came into power and you came in as an MP, or even if you just came in as an MP,
yes,
would you stand up in Parliament and ask for sanctions to be imposed on Israel to reach that two-state solution?
Yes.
You would ask for that? Okay.
Yeah,
that's fine. We have got, I'm conscious of the time, so we're going to be hopping subjects. My apologies for that. But listeners out there, do keep your questions coming in. Text or WhatsApp. I'm not going to go onto the lines because that takes a bit too long. But text or WhatsApp 07460809218. it's linked to the subject more or less. What are your views, listeners asking, what are your views on Tony Blair? Should he be tried for war crimes?
Okay, we have to acknowledge that in 1997, Tony Blair was brought in with a huge majority and brought some wonderful policies into the country back in 1997. If it wasn't for we had the minimum wage, for example, which the Tories said couldn't be done, couldn't be delivered, but of course. And that, it was fantastic, and we have to ensure that we continue to clamp down on employers who aren't paying the minimum wage. There's still far too much exploitation going on, and we know this government have absolutely failed to deal with many of those exploitative workers. Been literally a handful of prosecutions since their inception in 2010. But going forward, obviously, Tony Blair will be remembered by many people for the Iraq War, and unfortunately, that will be his legacy, which obviously was a more than an unfortunate event. Do I think he should be tried for war crimes? No.
You don't. What about the Chilcot report? I mean, it's not been... they've put it off until after the election.
Yes.
Do you think it should have been out now? Do you think the public, because it's finished, should the public have been able to see the Chilcot report so that they can make, again, an informed decision?
Again, I don't think there's a particularly sort of straightforward answer regarding the Chilcot report. I think we have to remember the Iraq War had the support of a number of parties. It wasn't merely Tony Blair, although he was the Prime Minister at the time. There was cross-party support for the invasion.
You remember that many people will believe that, he took the country to invade another country on a false premise.
And
on false premises.
And against 2 million people marching in London.
Yes.
Saying, and that was the public who were
I
marching.
Recall, yes.
And we had over 200,000, that was the minimum estimate, 200,000 people killed, or rather murdered.
Yeah.
On false premise.
It's destabilized the entire region. The problems we're seeing today, and eventually, to be honest with you, because this new bill, the CTS bill, does say Syria and Iraq, and eventually we've come to this bill because of what Tony Blair did. So do you think...
Again, go back, it did have the invasion had cross-party support. So I think sometimes, people will use Tony Blair as sometimes as the... he was the Prime Minister at the time, I do acknowledge that, and he ultimately took that decision, which I did not agree with. So I'm quite clear on my stance on Iraq.
We have got quite a long text message, and it's got a number of questions. And but I mean, it's for the listeners. We've said from the outset that we do want our listeners to engage on this program, and alhamdulillah, very pleased that you have. Keep them coming in. We've got a very short time, but do keep them coming in. 07460809218. Now then, this gentleman or lady asked the question: my voting decision in the general election in May 2015 will depend on the candidate's the PPC's position on Palestine. I will be more likely to vote for an MP to become vote for someone to become an MP who calls for an end of the siege of Gaza. We will take this one at a time. Calls for an end of the siege of Gaza. Paula, would you call for an end of the siege of Gaza?
Yes.
Okay. Calls for the protection of Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem against extremist Israeli settler attacks. The Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. So would you call for protection of the mosque against extremist Israeli settler attacks?
I would call against protection from any extremism.
Okay. Calls for the immediate and unconditional end to the occupation? The occupation in the West Bank?
Yes.
Yep. Is Paula going to join Labour Friends of Palestine as an MP? She going to? Okay, and how is she going to lobby Parliament?
I absolutely will join Labour Friends of Palestine. I actually spoke at length with the Labour Friends of Palestine representative at our party conference last year, and was very proud to win a book all about it's Palestine Guide. I was hoping to go there this January. I'm joining a women's trip. Right. To Gaza in the West Bank. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible in this January for logistical reasons, but I hope to go during 2015.
Right.
So I think in terms of lobbying, yes, I will absolutely be an active member of that group, but I think it's really important that I go and actually I want to see it for myself.
Okay, they did have another question, which was, does she support the BDS campaign? But you've already answered that. You've said on the BDS campaign you'd have to look into it before you could make a...
Is this the boycott?
The
I
boycott,
just want to say, I
sanctions.
don't want to make false promises today. I want to obviously look at the finer detail.
That's fine. That's fair enough. What are your views on the EU-Israel Association Agreement? Should it be suspended until Israel meets its human rights obligations?
I don't know the finer detail of that legislation. So again, I don't want to sort of commit to something that I wouldn't be able to adhere to. But obviously, any human rights abuses must be taken incredibly seriously.
This comes back onto the issue of sanctions, doesn't it? I mean, would you be asking the EU? Israel comes to the table with no seriousness whatsoever. We've seen it that Israel have come to the table on the same morning or an hour earlier, has released a press release saying we're going to build illegal settlements in the West Bank. There's 100 more illegal settlements going to go up, and then they're coming to the negotiating table. Now that's not really an honest, right? So would you be asking EU to suspend trade with Israel? To reach, I mean, no one's saying that everything turns it back into Palestine. Everyone's saying the same thing. We want a two-state solution. We want peace in the Middle East. We want people to be able to live on both sides.
Yes, of course.
So, would you be willing to support the EU suspending trade with Israel until it comes to it basically comes to
potentially, but I would have to look at the evidence in terms of some sort of evidence-based research to understand, exactly when things have occurred, and I'd be looking for a mediated approach.
Okay,
but yes, potentially.
Okay, because I've got another topic I wanted to get onto, and we will get into. But we've got one more. Okay, we've got another message that's come in, which is: does Britain seriously need to reassess its foreign policy? Does Britain seriously need to reassess its foreign policy?
In what context? There would have to be more sort of... I would need an elaboration on that.
Well, listener, if you're out there, can you elaborate on that question? And we will keep Paula until then, so you can spend...
Well, while you're thinking, Paula, I mean, what are your plans for education in Dewsbury? I mean, what do you feel in particular about free schools and about academies that are cropping up left, right, and centre everywhere?
Okay, I'm quite. One of the things about education is some policy announcements that were made today from the Labour government. Is one of the huge things that concerns me about education in Dewsbury. Again, in this area, we've seen a disproportionate increase in class sizes.
Yeah,
and gone up hugely in the last 5 years, and Labour will cap a class size of to 30. And we've already seen classes round here of up to sort of 40 children. And obviously...
Really?
Absolutely.
40 in a class?
Yes, absolutely.
How many teachers in the class?
Well, usually it would depend from school to school, and it would depend upon the sort of whether the children had sort of special educational needs. But
I really can't think of any school with a class size of 40 and
to
one
40,
teacher.
Yeah.
Up to 40?
No, there'll be a teacher and a teaching assistant.
Teacher.
Even then, I feel that it's sort of not within my sort of knowledge.
Yes. Mr. Bismillah is a former head teacher of many years.
No, I'm aware of some schools that are heading
especially
up
in primary sector, and in the early years, there's already a cap.
I'll try and provide those statistics for you.
Yes, I'd be very much interested in that.
But also, we would not allow unqualified teachers.
Right.
To teach children. We've seen a huge increase, and this government has allowed. There's been a deluge of unqualified teachers teaching our children, so we would repeal that.
Okay.
What about academies and free schools? What are your views on academies in particular?
Academies, it concerns me, to be honest.
It was a Labour Party initiative, wasn't it?
It was initially. However, the current government have extended and increased this initiative exponentially, and I think we've seen some evidence that there's an academy just down the road that is failing, and it obviously is had some strong recommendations made in terms of its future attainment. So yeah, it does concern me. I would like to see more local authority control back in schools.
Right. Okay. Now, then, one of the things you mentioned previously has been regarding the regeneration of Dewsbury Town.
Yes.
What do you see Dewsbury Town as at the moment?
Dewsbury Town it's something that people talk to me about an awful lot. We're just opening our office in Dewsbury Town Centre at the moment, and it's attracted a lot of attention already. People are coming along, knocking on the door, asking what we're opening. Is it a shop? Is it a business? And there's a lot of issues there. I think, again, the town has been neglected by the current MP. Unfortunately, he seems to prioritise working in his other job than being an MP, and that's evidenced by the fact he's only spoken 3 times in the last 12 months in Parliament, submitted 4 written questions, again, well below average. Right. So we need somebody who's going to take the bull by the horns and really get to grips.
Okay,
and we can't afford any more deterioration.
Okay, I'm very conscious of the time. There's a minute, but I'm hoping you stay a few more minutes, just a few minutes more, because I do want to ask this question now. The town centre, I mean, the regeneration of the town centre. Kirklees Council presently are throwing initiatives, and the council is a Labour-led council. There's a very strong Labour stronghold with across Batley and Dewsbury as far as the councillors are concerned, councillors go, and the push is towards turning Dewsbury Town into a residential area. Is that going to work?
There's a lot of evidence out there at the moment. I've done quite a lot of work on the regeneration of town centres, and I'm actually the chair of the business forum in a neighbouring town, or in a town very, very close by, rather. So it's something I have sort of done quite a lot of research in. And there's evidence out there at the moment that you've got to shrink town centres down slightly. So I'm largely in favour of bringing back sort of old buildings and converting those into apartments and things like that, rather than leaving them empty. And it can also help towards solving our sort of housing issues. Yes. But in terms of regeneration of Dewsbury Town Centre, no, it has to have a combination. I think we've got to look at the wider picture. We've even got to look at the nighttime agenda, not necessarily around bringing lots of licensed premises in, but looking at sort of what's Dewsbury's niche, if you like. And again, people talk to me all the time. The main issue that comes up is parking.
Yes.
We've got to have a consultation on parking. We acknowledge it brings in, it's a revenue stream for the council, so it's not as simple as saying, right, okay, from now on, from tomorrow, parking's free in Dewsbury. But clearly it's a big issue and there's a conversation to be had. So right, yes, okay. I would.
On the parking issue, because I did have that down, on the parking issue, it's quite crazy. Park in the town centre, for 45 minutes, it costs you 50 pence.
Yes.
To park, even during weekdays, to park in the car park next to Sports Direct and that. Forgive me for plugging them, but anyway,
there are other sports shops available.
Sports shops, the sports shops and the fast food restaurant there, 5 pence.
Yes.
Why haven't the council? I mean, like you say, I have asked them actually for figures, and unfortunately, they couldn't give me a breakdown of just Dewsbury Town Centre, sadly. But there's 2 issues that I want to, and I want to say this very, very quickly because I know I'm conscious of time. Number one, why is it that on a weekday when there's no market and no real, when there's not a lot of people in town, why is it that parking hasn't been turned to free so that there's a lot of fast food outlets in Dewsbury and people can come in, hop out of their cars, grab their food, and hop back out again, which would generate. Second part is, a lot of people have accused the council of having these disabled bays which are not clearly marked, and they've become victims of this parking. And there's been shopkeepers local who have turned around and said to me that the traffic wardens are literally waiting round the corner, wait for the person to get out of the car, wait for the person to walk away, and then pounce, stick the ticket and run away.
Okay, first of all, I acknowledge that there are some very keen traffic wardens in Dewsbury. I think one thing I want to make absolutely clear is that I think there is definitely an argument for looking at the parking charges in Dewsbury. However, we have to acknowledge that this council is currently undergoing cuts of 40%. So 40% of the council's budget is being taken away by this Tory Liberal Democrat government. But the thing is, it is absolutely, the cuts are disproportionate. In some areas, the people, the local councillors have actually had an uplift in their budget. So if you look at the top 10 areas in the country that have had the biggest cuts by per head per population, 9 of those councils are Labour led. So, and I think once again, it's a mandate from this government to attack Labour-led councils. So we're having to make some incredibly tough decisions, and that takes me on to the fact that if we do decide to make parking free in Dewsbury, we have to find that money from somewhere else. And there's some terrible decisions going on at the moment. Shaw Start Centres under review, libraries under review. And it's okay, sort of local Conservatives and Liberal Democrats and other parties, saying, well, it's the Labour Council cutting those services. No, it's not the Labour Council. Those cuts have come directly from central government. And we need, instead of those councillors sort of attacking the Labour-led council, they need to be lobbying their own government, their own part-time MP, and saying, look, go back to Westminster and challenge why Kirklees and why other northern councils are receiving such huge cuts. But I do acknowledge that there is a consultation to be had around the parking situation in Dewsbury.
Can an MP honestly put forward proposals like parking, etc., against the council who are hell-bent on this is how it's going to be?
The MP can work with the council in partnership, and it's all about partnership working. So it's getting round that table and having those discussions and even reaching a compromise. Sometimes you don't get 100% of what you want, but you might be able to agree.
The people of Batley might not well agree with you, because Batley does have a Labour MP, and they've had for the past 18 years, and a very fine MP indeed.
Absolutely.
And Batley does have the Labour councillors, but unfortunately Batley have lost a lot, and in particular when you look at Tesco's, it was built away from the road, and it was built away because councillors eventually gave permission to Tesco's to do that. So how much of an influence is an MP really going to have on a council that is led by its own party?
I think, once again, it's about there's no substitute for getting around that table and starting those discussions. And I will, Dewsbury Town Centre and Town Centre regeneration in general, not just in Dewsbury, will be one of my priorities, will be one of my 5 priorities if I'm elected in May.
Okay, I'm not going to take any more time. There's just one final question, because I know the person who messaged in regarding the foreign policy, I think it's the disproportionate, the inconsistency of Britain, of the British foreign policy. We seem to, for example, we've seen the MP, and I dare say if it was a Labour government, it would have been any different, standing arm in arm in the streets in Paris in solidarity. And we agree with that. Why didn't we see the same thing happen in the craters of Gaza? And this is the question. Why is it that we've seen one thing happen in Paris but not happening in Gaza? Do you think the British foreign policy needs to be revamped? Do you think we need to maybe step away from being so close to America and start being Britain again?
I'm incredibly proud to be British, but I think a lot of that is based on an individual basis. I remember when the Peshawar tragedy happened fairly recently, and there was a vigil at Dewsbury Town Hall which I attended and spoke at, and again, the horror, and people said to me that wasn't acknowledged throughout the world, and again, I think it's up to individual MPs to, I think,
it's
politics
up to the individual
is changing.
MPs, but it's the government response, really, isn't it? In Paris, you have you have prime ministers flying out and arm locking in solidarity. You mentioned Peshawar there. That was just a few weeks earlier. Surely politicians should have been prime ministers should have been, and presidents should have been on the plane in the streets of Peshawar doing exactly the same and showing their support for the victims there. I mean, there was a lot of children who died there.
Absolutely. And
do you think the Labour Party would do that? Do you think the Labour leadership would do that?
It's impossible to say. Obviously, the time has happened. I'd like to think personally, if something affected my constituents on a sort of wide basis, that I would be there to support them through any sort of tragedy.
Right. Okay, Paula, are you very
one very last question, Paula. I'm conscious of the time, and I know this subject could be huge as well. So you could be here for another half an hour or so.
We'll try not to.
I'm actually, where I'm going next is I'm not intending to sort of go home. I'm actually going to help a constituent fill out an application form for a job. Right. So that's the only reason I'm rushing off this evening.
Right. I've just been reading some of your Twitter messages.
Okay.
And I see that you're an avid fan of boxing.
Yeah.
Do I have a favourite sort of boxer in mind, or
Yeah,
are you a boxer yourself?
No, I'm absolutely not a boxer. I've been to a few boxing events recently at Dewsbury Town Hall. They've been instigated by KBW, who run a gym in Saviltown. And they've been absolutely fantastic. The first time I went, I have to admit, I watched the first boxing match sort of through my fingers. And there was a young lad, was sort of a bit battered, and And when he came up, I presented him with the award, and I said, "Are you all right?" He said, "I'm fine." I said, "Are you sure?" And I did sort of I felt quite maternal towards him. But on a serious note, what absolutely brilliant events, really well organised by KBW and Shami from the gym. Absolutely brilliant, getting loads of people there, literally hundreds of people. And these are the sort of things let's talk Dewsbury and the area up. I'm sick of people you open the paper and people sometimes say, "Oh, Dewsbury this, Dewsbury that." Yeah, we've got a lot of challenges ahead. We've got a lot of things we want to achieve in Dewsbury, but we've also got absolutely loads to be proud of in this area. I'm incredibly proud to be given the opportunity to represent this constituency. And, when I'm sitting in those sort of in that boxing area, it's just fantastic. Kids of all ethnicity. There was Asian, there was Afro-Caribbean, there was white. I think there was an Oriental lad. It was absolutely great. Like I say, really well organised. Let's have lots more events like that at Dewsbury. And that's what I was saying when I'm talking about the nighttime economy. Yeah. Let's think outside the box. Okay. We could make Dewsbury a sort of a national name for amateur boxing, and let's go for it. Let's not let anything stop us.
Thanks very much, Paula, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of Radio IMWS for being with us tonight. Thank you for your time. And all the best for your campaign.
Thank you. Yep. It's a pleasure and really good to talk to you both, and happy to come back at any time.
Well, no, yes, hopefully we will be calling you back as well. When's the manifesto out?
The election address will be out just a few weeks before the election, so in April. But in between then, obviously, we've got lots of literature. But I'm happy to come if anyone's listening tonight and they think I would like Paula to come to our community event. Just get in touch. Yep. More than happy to pop along.
That's brilliant. Again, just from myself as well and from the radio studio, again, best of luck. We do hope to call you back in before the election.
Please do.
And hopefully we'll be able to, but if the manifesto is out by that time, then hopefully we'll be able to quiz you on some of the policies
I'd be delighted
your party are going to put forward. Okay, that's it. You have been listening to Radio IMWS, the election special. Now then, Ayubai, who we got next week?
Right, we've got the prospective parliamentary candidate for Labour Party in Batley and Spen, Joe Cox.
Right, we've got Joe Cox in the studio next Friday. That's going to be at 8 p.m. And hopefully, again, listeners out there, remember, send in your questions. Now, tonight or even last week, it might have been a case that you wanted to ask a question and you never managed to ask the question. That's not a problem, because Begum is running a reader's question. All the parliamentary candidates, local parliamentary candidates from Labour and Conservative parties have agreed to it. So we have had agreement from the Labour and Conservatives in Dewsbury and in Batley. So Paul has kindly agreed as well. So do send your questions to pegam@radioimws.org.uk. You might not have been able to get on tonight. Do send them, and hopefully, inshallah, we will be following that up, and you will be able to read those answers in the April issue. Remember, next week, election special, Joe Cox will be in the studio. Labour's Joe Cox will be in the studio with myself and Ayubai. On Sunday, programs coming up. We have Kids Zone from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. And we have this Sunday, inshallah, we have our special guest, the children of Paradise Primary.
Excellent, super.
That's going to be
your
good.
Constituency, indeed.
That is your yes. Prospective constituency.
Oh, absolutely.
Perspective. I have to correct you, Ayuba. I'm sorry.
I'm glad you did, yeah.
Right, okay, you are listening to Radio IMWS. On Tuesday, we'll have the Islam program. Wednesday, we'll be back with you with the Gujarati program and Muhammad Zawa. And on Thursday, the current affairs. Next Friday, back with election special. That's it for us for this evening. Do remember us in your du'as, and inshallah ta'ala, we do hope that tonight has been of great benefit to you. Until the next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Online and on your home receiver, you're listening to Radio IMWS.